September 1st, 1943. Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai's hand paused over the intelligence report, his one good eye, the other lost to American gunners a year earlier, scanning words that made him laugh out loud in the humid operations tent. The Americans have produced a new fighter, heavy as a bomber, wide as a transport. They call it Hellcat. Our intelligence suggests it weighs twice our Zero, another American failure of design. Through the tent flaps, he could see his squadron's A6M-Zeros lined up on the pierced steel planking, sleek, nimble, deadly. For 2 years, these aircraft had dominated Pacific skies. British Hurricanes, American P-40S, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes, all had fallen before the Zero's guns. The Americans' latest attempt, this bloated Hellcat, would be no different. What Sakai didn't know, what none of the Japanese naval aviators gathering for their morning briefing knew, was that in exactly 30 days, this failure would begin the systematic annihilation of Japanese naval aviation. The F-6F Hellcat would achieve a kill ratio of 19-1, destroying 5,223 enemy aircraft, while losing only 270 in aerial combat. It would transform carrier warfare, break the back of Japanese air power, and prove that the Zero's reign of terror had been built on a foundation of fatal assumptions. The mathematics of aerial supremacy were about to be rewritten by an aircraft that looked wrong, flew heavy, and seemed to violate every principle the Japanese had perfected. Yet within 6 months, the very pilots now laughing at intelligence reports would be writing final letters home, knowing that encountering Hellcats meant statistical certainty of death. The rising sun's zenith. The Japanese Navy's confidence in September 1943 wasn't arrogance, it was mathematics. Since December 7th, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had achieved victory ratios that defied belief. At Pearl Harbor, they lost 29 aircraft while destroying 347. In the Philippines, 7 losses against 103 destroyed. Over Darwin, 2 losses versus 30. The British Far East Fleet's air arm, annihilated. The Dutch East Indies Air Force, eliminated in days. At the centre of this dominance flew the Mitsubishi A6M-0, an aircraft that had rewritten the rules of fighter design. When captured examples were tested by American engineers in 1942, they initially refused to believe the performance figures. A fighter with the range of a bomber, the maneuverability of a biplane, and the firepower to destroy anything it caught, it seemed impossible. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would become Japan's ace of aces with 87 confirmed kills, described the Zero in his recovered diary. Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought, not just control input. American planes fly like trucks, powerful but clumsy. They build fighters like they build cars, heavy, overbuilt, wasteful. The Zero achieved its miraculous performance through revolutionary design philosophy. Extra super duralumin, a classified aluminum alloy, created a structure 30% lighter than comparable American designs. No armor plate protected the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks added weight. Even the radio was often removed to save 30 pounds. Every ounce sacrificed for performance. The intelligence dismissal. The first reports of the F-6F Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence through neutral Swedish sources in early 1943. The specifications seemed like propaganda, or perhaps deliberate misinformation. The aircraft weighed 12,186 pounds loaded. The Zero weighed 5,800. Its wing area spanned 334 square feet with a draggy radial engine. It carried 2,400 rounds of ammunition, armor plate everywhere, bulletproof glass, self-sealing tanks holding 250 gallons of fuel. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who had planned Pearl Harbor, reviewed the specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His analysis, preserved in the Japanese defense archives, was dismissive. The Americans have learned nothing. This Hellcat represents the continuation of their failed philosophy, attempting to overcome pilot skill with weight of machinery. A Zero will fly circles around it. The mathematics seemed to support his assessment. The Zero's wing loading of 22 pounds per square foot gave it a turning radius of 612 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot suggested a turning radius over 900 feet. In a turning fight, the basis of all Japanese fighter tactics, the Hellcat would be helpless. The first glimpse. September 30th, 1943. Marcus Island. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission when he spotted them. 6 dark blue shapes climbing from the southeast. His first thought, recorded in his after-action report, B-25 bombers on a strange heading. Then they turned, and he saw the distinctive silhouette, single engine, massive fuselage, wings that seemed too short for the body. First encounter with F-6F type fighter, he would write. Initial impression, Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber, engaged with standard tactics. Standard tactics meant using the Zero's superior turn rate to get on the enemy's tail. Fukui rolled into a diving turn, expecting the heavy American fighter to continue straight, allowing him to curve onto its 6 o'clock position. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The Hellcat didn't run. It didn't try to turn with him. It went vertical. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, producing 2,000 horsepower, 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima Sakai's 1,130 horsepower, drove the Hellcat upward at 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui, attempting to follow, watched his airspeed decay as the Zero struggled against gravity. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat performed a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible for its weight, a hammerhead turn that dropped it directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 meters, Fukui reported. 6 machine guns, not the 4 we expected. The volume of fire was unprecedented. My aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did I escape. Fukui survived, barely making it back to Marcus Island with his Zero riddled with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Masao Sato, didn't return. Neither did the reconnaissance plane they were escorting. First blood to the Hellcat. The Weight Paradox. October 5th, 1943. Task Force 14 struck Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what appeared to be another nuisance raid. American carriers had been launching these hit-and-run attacks for months, usually fleeing before Japanese fighters could fully engage. This time would be different. We climbed to 20,000 feet, Shiga recorded in his diary. Below us, 12 F-6F fighters in 3 divisions. We held every advantage: altitude, position, surprise. Victory was certain. The engagement that followed shattered Japanese tactical doctrine. As the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters didn't scatter or attempt to turn. They maintained formation, accelerating in a gentle dive that kept their energy high. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, hoping for lucky hits, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment. The Hellcat's armour included 212 pounds of plate protecting the pilot, 110 pounds around the oil system, self-sealing tanks that could take dozens of hits. As the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in diving passes, the Hellcats executed their counterattack. Instead of turning to dogfight, they used their weight as a weapon. Climbing at full power, they reached altitude where the Zero's engine struggled for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing 1,650 horsepower. The Zero was down to 900. They came down on us like hawks on sparrows, Shiga wrote. Their weight gave them speed we couldn't match. They would dive, fire those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before we could react. 8 Zeros were shot down. No Hellcats were lost. The Marianas turkey shoot prophecy. November 11th, 1943. Rabaul. The assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened as Lieutenant Commander Takeo Tanemizu briefed them on American tactics. Tanemizu, with 32 victories, was one of the few pilots who had survived multiple encounters with Hellcats. "Forget everything you know about air combat," he told them. "The Americans have changed the rules. They no longer fight our fight. They fight like executioners, not warriors." Tanemizu explained what Japanese pilots were slowly, fatally learning. The Hellcat wasn't designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to never need to. Using a combat doctrine called energy fighting, Hellcat pilots maintained speed and altitude, converting potential energy to kinetic energy in slashing attacks that gave Zero pilots no chance to use their superior maneuverability. "They work in pairs," Tanemizu continued. "One high, one low. While you engage one, the other is already diving on you. Their radios, which we laughed at for adding weight, let them coordinate perfectly. We fly as individual samurai. They fight as a machine." The Technology Gulf, December 1943, Truk Lagoon. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, now served as Air Operations Officer for the combined fleet. His inspection of damaged Zeros returning from encounters with Hellcats revealed the growing technology gap. The disparity in firepower was mathematical. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2 machine guns fired 750 rounds per minute each, 4,500 rounds per minute total. Each .50 caliber bullet weighed 46 grams and travelled at 2,900 feet per second, delivering 3,500 foot-pounds of energy. The Zero's two 7.7mm machine guns fired projectiles weighing 11 grams at 2,300 feet per second, 750 foot-pounds of energy. More disturbing were the reports of American radar-guided fighter direction. While Japanese pilots still relied on eyesight to spot enemies, Hellcat pilots were guided to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who could see Japanese aircraft from 50 miles away. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi described his first radar-directed interception. "We were climbing through clouds when they hit us. No warning, no visual contact. Hellcats diving from above, exactly on our heading, perfectly positioned. They knew where we were, our altitude, our course. We were blind men fighting those who could see in the dark." The Pilot Equation, January 1944. The Japanese pilot crisis was becoming catastrophic. The pre-war Imperial Navy pilot training program had been the world's most demanding. Training took 3 years, with pilots entering combat with 700 flight hours. Army pilots received 500 hours minimum. They were artists of aerial combat, trained in aerobatics, gunnery, and the spiritual philosophy of air fighting. By early 1944, Japanese naval pilots were entering combat with 300 hours of flight time, Army pilots with 200. Fuel shortages meant most training was done in gliders. Gunnery practice was limited to 50 rounds per pilot. Formation flying, instrument flight, radio procedures, all eliminated to rush pilots to the front. Meanwhile, American pilots were arriving with 300 hours minimum, including 50 hours in type. They had fired thousands of practice rounds, practiced carrier landings until they were automatic, learned energy tactics in safety over Texas airfields. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, training officer at Kasumigaura Naval Air Station, wrote in his final report, "We are sending children to fight professionals." Yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto arrived at the front. He had never fired his guns in flight. "We have no ammunition for practice." He had never flown at night. "We have no fuel for such training." He lasted 7 minutes in his first combat. The Formosa Revelation, October 12th to 16th, 1944, the Battle of Formosa. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, commander of the Second Air Fleet, committed everything to stop the American carrier raids on Formosa. Over 700 aircraft, including the last trained pilots from the homeland training squadrons. The Japanese claimed spectacular victory. 26 carriers and battleships sunk, 300 aircraft destroyed. The reality, discovered only after pilots returned and gun camera footage was developed, was catastrophic. Actual American losses, 89 aircraft. Japanese losses, 329 aircraft and almost every experienced pilot. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the few surviving veterans, described the slaughter in his memoirs. The Hellcats were waiting at every altitude. As we climbed, they were above us. As we dove, they were below. They had divided the sky into grids, each section covered by a division. It was not combat, it was systematic extermination. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea. The Japanese Navy committed its reconstituted carrier force to Operation Ago, the decisive battle that would destroy American carrier power in the Pacific. 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, their best remaining pilots. Against them, Task Force 58 with 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, 450 of them F-6F Hellcats. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 waves, confident that Japanese pilot skill and the Zero's range advantage would prevail. The first wave of 69 aircraft launched at 0830. American radar detected them at 150 miles. Hellcats were vectored for interception with perfect positioning, altitude advantage, sun at their backs, approaching from the Japanese blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, saw the Hellcats minutes before engagement. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them, waiting like a steel curtain. We were at 18,000 feet. Every advantage was theirs. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were shot down. Commander David McCampbell, CAG of Air Group 15, shot down 7 aircraft in that single day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, got 6. "The Zeros tried to turn with us," McCampbell reported. "We simply refused. We'd make a high-side run, shoot one down, zoom climb back to altitude. They'd try to follow, stall out, and another Hellcat would pick them off." By day's end, the Japanese had lost 346 carrier aircraft plus 50 land-based aircraft. American losses, 30 aircraft from all causes. American pilots in their ready rooms that evening coined the term turkey shoot. The enemy aircraft had been as helpless as game birds. The Leyte Gulf Record, October 24, 1944, the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Commander David McCampbell would set his single-mission record during this battle. Leading 7 Hellcats from Essex, he intercepted a force of 60 Japanese aircraft heading for the American fleet. In the ensuing 90-minute battle, McCampbell shot down 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers, while his wingman Roy Rushing destroyed 6 more. "I ran out of ammunition after the 9th kill," McCampbell recorded. "The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout. Not a single hit on my aircraft despite being outnumbered 8-1. This engagement demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without loss. McCampbell's 2 ace-in-a-day performances, 7 kills on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, earned him the Medal of Honor and Navy Cross. The psychological collapse. The aftermath of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf battles produced what Japanese military psychologists later termed Hellcat psychosis among surviving pilots. Admiral Ozawa, in his after-action report, wrote, "The enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved something we thought impossible, the industrialization of air combat. Each Hellcat was not an individual fighter, but a component in a vast machine. Our pilots, no matter how skilled, were engaging not planes but a system. The pilot shortage became so acute that by early 1945, training was reduced to 40 to 50 hours for Navy pilots, 60 to 70 hours for Army pilots. Kamikaze pilots received only 40 to 50 hours total, approximately 7 days of training. The Okinawa Apocalypse, April to June 1945, Operation Iceberg. The Japanese launched 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet off Okinawa. The Hellcat became not just a fighter, but a defender against the desperation of suicide attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his Flying Circus division of Hellcats, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign. His tactical innovations, using divisions of 4 aircraft in coordinated attacks, made traditional Japanese tactics suicidal. "We developed what we called the mowing machine," Valencia explained. 4 Hellcats in line abreast, separated by 100 yards, would sweep through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot covered his sector. We'd make one pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. The mathematics of the Okinawa campaign were stark. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming 2,351 victories against 249 losses, a 9.5 to 1 ratio. More significantly, they prevented approximately 80% of kamikaze aircraft from reaching their targets. The technology chasm. By 1945, the technological gap had become unbridgeable. The F-6 F-5 Hellcat incorporated improvements that made it even deadlier. Water injection boosting power to 2,200 horsepower, zero-length rocket launchers, improved armor, and the K-14 computing gun sight that calculated deflection automatically. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace with 28 official victories, though modern historians estimate closer to 15, encountered Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. Despite his skill and experience, he was nearly killed in his first engagement. "I performed my best aerobatics," he wrote in his autobiography. "Loops, rolls, splits, every maneuver I had perfected over 200 combats. The Hellcat followed easily, almost casually. I survived only because the American pilot made an error. He forgot to release his drop tank before combat." The human cost accounting. By war's end, the F-6F Hellcat had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, lost 270 aircraft to enemy fighters, achieved a 19.3 to 1 kill ratio, produced 305 U.S. Navy aces, accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories. The human cost for Japan was catastrophic. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had started the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945. The kamikaze equation. The transformation of Japanese naval aviation from an elite force to kamikaze operations represented the ultimate admission of the Hellcat's superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan turned its pilots into guided missiles. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the kamikaze program, justified it with stark mathematics. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, probability of success is near zero. The Hellcats will destroy it. If the Zero becomes a bomb, probability of hitting increases to 30%. The pilot dies either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death has meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa escorted the first official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, claiming his 86th and 87th victories, 2 F-6F Hellcats in the process. The next day, October 26, 1944, Nishizawa died as a passenger aboard a transport shot down by Hellcats from VF-14. Japan's greatest ace, helpless without a fighter, fell to the very aircraft he had briefly bested. The final testimony. August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast. At Atsugi Airfield, Captain Minoru Genda, who had dismissed the Hellcat as weight over finesse, listened to the Emperor's words. Around him sat the remnants of Japanese naval aviation, teenage pilots with 40 hours of flight time, aircraft cobbled together from spare parts, empty fuel tanks. That same day, Ensign Clarence Moore of VF-31, flying from USS Belleau Wood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber after 2 p.m., the last aerial victory of World War II. The Japanese pilot, apparently unaware of the surrender, was approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted him. 2 short bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns ended the Pacific Air War. The occupation revelation. September 1945, Atsugi Airfield. The first American aircraft to land after the surrender were 12 F-6F Hellcats from USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots, mechanics, and ground crew lined the runway to see their tormentor up close. American pilot Lieutenant Robert Vrasiu, ace with 19 victories, demonstrated the Hellcat's capabilities to Japanese pilots. His casual aerobatics, loops, rolls, and climbs that would have torn a Zero apart, left them speechless. "You have to understand," Vrasiu told them through an interpreter, "this isn't even pushing it. In combat with water injection, it's 20% more powerful. The plane is stressed for 13 Gs. I've never managed to break one." The engineering post-mortem. Japanese engineers studying captured Hellcats after the war discovered the true extent of American industrial superiority. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine contained 2,804 precision-machined parts, each interchangeable with any other R2800 engine. The Nakajima Sakai required hand-fitting of components. No 2 engines were exactly alike. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, studied the Hellcat extensively after the war. His conclusion was devastating. "We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age." The production miracle. Grumman's production of the Hellcat itself became a weapon. The Bethpage, New York factory operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At peak production, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. The company produced 12,275 Hellcats in 30 months, a feat the Japanese couldn't comprehend. In 1944, Japan produced 5,100 fighters of all types. America produced 35,000 fighters that year alone. The production system included innovations that seemed impossible to Japanese observers: workers using color-coded instructions to assemble complex components, shifts operating around the clock, quality maintaining despite speed. The strategic revolution. The Hellcat didn't just win battles, it revolutionized naval warfare. Pre-war doctrine assumed carriers were vulnerable platforms that needed to strike first to survive. The Hellcat inverted this. Carriers became fortresses that could absorb and repel any air attack. Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, understood this transformation. "With the Hellcat, we don't need to find them first. Let them come. The F-6F will destroy them at our convenience." This confidence allowed unprecedented offensive operations. American carriers could park off enemy coastlines for weeks, their Hellcat umbrellas making them essentially invulnerable to air attack. The cultural collision. Beyond technology, the Hellcat represented a cultural philosophy that invalidated Japanese military doctrine. The samurai tradition emphasized individual excellence, spiritual strength, and acceptance of death. The Hellcat embodied systematic efficiency, material superiority, and preservation of life. This philosophical gulf meant Japanese pilots couldn't adapt to Hellcat tactics even when they understood them. The concept of refusing combat when disadvantaged, fundamental to Hellcat doctrine, was literally unthinkable to Japanese pilots trained in Bushido. The judgment of history. In 1962, the United States Navy held a symposium on Pacific War aviation. American and Japanese veterans gathered to discuss the conflict with historical perspective. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's ace of aces with 34 victories, stated simply, "The Hellcat won the Pacific Air War, period. It destroyed Japanese aviation and made our victory inevitable." Commander Saburo Sakai responded, "The Zero was a superior fighter. The Hellcat was a superior weapon system. We never understood the difference until too late. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost. The ultimate reckoning. The Hellcat's dominance can be reduced to simple mathematics that tell a profound story. Kill ratio, 19-1 overall, 13-1 specifically against zeros. Hellcats produced 12,275 in 30 months. Zeros produced 1943 to 1945, approximately 6,000. American pilots trained on Hellcats, over 5,000. Japanese pilots remaining by August 1945, fewer than 100 combat-capable. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who had commanded the Japanese fleet at Philippine Sea, provided perhaps the most honest assessment. We laughed at the Hellcat because we didn't understand it represented not just an aircraft, but an entire civilization's approach to war. By the time we stopped laughing, our air forces had ceased to exist. The last word. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai lived until 2000. In his final interview, he was asked about the Hellcat. His response captured the totality of its dominance. The Zero made Japan a great naval power. The Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed. We thought we were samurai. The Hellcat showed us we were just men with outdated weapons facing the future. Every Japanese pilot who survived the war survived because a Hellcat pilot chose to let them live. That is the ultimate defeat, existing at your enemy's discretion. The F-6F Hellcat entered service weighing twice what the Zero weighed, carrying armour the Zero didn't have, powered by an engine the Japanese couldn't build, armed with weapons they couldn't match, guided by radars they couldn't detect, flown by pilots they couldn't equal in training and produced in numbers they couldn't comprehend. Japanese pilots had laughed at it because they didn't understand that every extra pound represented not weakness, but the strength of an industrial democracy that could afford to protect its warriors. By the time they understood, their laughter had turned to last letters home, their mockery to kamikaze missions, their confidence to complete collapse. The Hellcat hadn't just defeated the Zeros, it had destroyed an entire philosophy of warfare, proving that in modern combat, the nation that could build the better system would destroy the nation that could only build better warriors. The Japanese pilots had laughed at the F-6F Hellcat. The Hellcat had the last laugh. It always did. July 2nd, 1943. Castelvetrano Airfield, Sicily. The Fokker-Wulf 190's pilot never saw the P-40 Warhawk diving from above until machine gun fire tore through his fuselage, sending his aircraft spiralling toward the Sicilian countryside below. First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, a 22-year-old from Brazil, Indiana, had just recorded what German Luftwaffe commanders believed impossible. A black pilot had shot down one of their elite fighter aircraft. The swastika painted on Hall's P-40L Warhawk that afternoon would become the first of 112 enemy aircraft destroyed by the men the Germans would reportedly come to call Schwarze Vogelmenschen, the Black Birdmen. In Nazi Germany, racial doctrine classified black people as Untermensch, subhuman, incapable of mastering complex machinery or demonstrating courage in combat. The Nuremberg laws had forbidden marriages between Germans and people of African descent. Yet here, above the Mediterranean skies, that ideology was about to collide catastrophically with reality, as 992 trained pilots from Tuskegee, Alabama, would systematically demolish both German aircraft and German assumptions about racial superiority. What the Luftwaffe pilots didn't know as they climbed to intercept American bombers in 1943 was that they were about to face some of the most rigorously trained, highly motivated fighter pilots in the entire United States Army Air Forces, men who had overcome obstacles their white counterparts never faced, who had trained harder and longer than standard pilots, and who carried into battle not just the weight of national duty, but the burden of proving an entire race's capability. The mathematics of aerial combat would soon be written in the skies over Europe. 15,000 combat sorties, 1,578 missions, 112 aerial victories, and a bomber escort loss rate significantly lower than white fighter groups. Statistics that would force even the most fanatical Nazi ideologues to confront the bankruptcy of their racial theories. The journey toward that first aerial victory began not in combat, but in the hostile environment of American segregation. In 1925, the U.S. Army War College had published a report titled Employment of Negro Manpower in War that concluded, "Compared to the white man, he is admittedly of inferior mentality. He is inherently weak in character." This official military assessment claimed that black soldiers lacked the intelligence for technical roles and the courage for combat leadership. Yet even as military leaders clung to these prejudices, a small group of black Americans was already proving them wrong. Eugene Bullard had flown for France in World War I because America wouldn't let him serve. Bessie Coleman had earned her pilot's license in France in 1921, when no American flight school would accept her. By the 1930s, the Coffey School of Aeronautics in Chicago had trained dozens of black civilian pilots, demonstrating that flying skill knew no racial boundaries. The pressure for change intensified as war clouds gathered over Europe. Civil rights leaders like Walter White of the NAACP, Labour leader A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie lobbied relentlessly for black inclusion in military aviation. Black newspapers, the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Baltimore Afro-American, hammered the Roosevelt administration with a simple question: how could America fight for democracy abroad while denying it at home? On April 3, 1939, Public Law 18 finally cracked open the door. Senator Harry H. Schwartz had inserted an amendment requiring the civilian pilot training program to include one or more schools designated by the Civil Aeronautics Authority for the training of any Negro air pilot. It was a grudging concession wrapped in segregation, but it was a beginning. When Franklin Roosevelt ran for an unprecedented third term in 1940, he needed black votes in key northern cities. On January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson announced the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black flying unit. The announcement came with a caveat that revealed the military's expectations. This would be an experiment to test whether blacks could be trained as combat pilots. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. understood the weight of command when he led 26 pilots of the 99th Fighter Squadron to North Africa in April 1943. The son of America's first black general, Davis had endured 4 years of silent treatment at West Point, where no white cadet would speak to him outside of official duties. Now he commanded men who carried not just their own hopes, but the aspirations of 13 million black Americans. The 99th arrived at Farjuna, Tunisia, attached to the 33rd Fighter Group under Colonel William W. Momia, a commander who made no secret of his skepticism about black pilots. Momia assigned them patrol missions over the Mediterranean, keeping them away from the real action. He wanted them to fail, and when they didn't immediately excel, he had his excuse. The morning of June 2, 1943, marked their first combat mission, an attack on the Italian-held island of Pantelleria. As their worn P-40 Warhawks climbed toward their targets, German fighters suddenly appeared. The Tuskegee pilots held formation, protecting their bombers. No aircraft were lost on either side, but the Germans had learned their first lesson. These pilots wouldn't break under pressure. But it was July 2, 1943, that changed everything. Charles Hall was flying his 8th mission, escorting B-25 Mitchell bombers attacking Castelvetrano airfield in Sicily. 2 Focke-Wulf 190s bore down on the bomber formation. Hall later testified, "I saw 2 Focke-Wulfs following the bombers just after the bombs were dropped. I headed for the space between the fighters and bombers and managed to turn inside the Jerrys. I fired a long burst and saw my tracers penetrate the second aircraft. He was turning to the left, but suddenly fell off and headed straight into the ground." When Hall landed, the entire base erupted. Black ground crews, who had endured months of insults from white personnel, finally had their answer to every slight. Hall's victory was the first aerial kill by a black American pilot in U.S. military history. By January 1944, the 99th Fighter Squadron had been in combat for 7 months, but Colonel Maumier had filed a devastating report claiming they lacked aggressiveness and recommending their removal from combat. The report reached General Henry Hap Arnold, who prepared to shut down the experiment. Then came Anzio. On January 27, 1944, the Luftwaffe launched massive raids on Allied forces at the Anzio beachhead. 15 pilots of the 99th, flying obsolete P-40s, encountered superior Focke-Wulf 190s over the battlefield. What followed would silence the critics forever. The 99th shot down multiple enemy aircraft. Sources vary between 8 and 13 kills over 2 days. Captain Charles Hall claimed 2 more victories, bringing his total to 3. In 2 days, flying inferior equipment, they had destroyed more enemy aircraft than they had in their previous 7 months of combat. The War Department launched a study comparing the 99th with other P-40 squadrons and concluded they were performing just as well as white units. The success at Anzio proved black pilots could excel in combat when given the opportunity. In May 1944, the 332nd Fighter Group, combining the 99th, 100th, 301st and 302nd Fighter Squadrons, received orders that would transform them from outcasts to legends. They would join the 15th Air Force as bomber escorts, flying the long, dangerous missions deep into Nazi Germany. Colonel Benjamin Davis gathered his pilots at Ramitelli Airfield on Italy's Adriatic coast. "We cannot afford to lose bombers," he told them. "Our job is not to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home." This directive would define their combat philosophy: stay with the bombers, no matter what. In June 1944, General Nathan Twining ordered a systematic marking system for fighter groups. Each would receive distinctive colours for instant identification. The 332nd was assigned red, not just red noses or red bands, but entire tail sections painted crimson. The P-51 Mustangs, with their red tails, red propeller spinners, and red nosebands, became instantly recognisable. The first bomber crews to receive red tail escorts didn't know their protectors were black. They only knew that these fighters stayed close, never abandoning them for easy kills. Word spread through the bomber groups: request the red tails if you can get them. July 18, 1944, would test the red tails like never before. Colonel Davis led 66 Mustangs to rendezvous with bombers targeting the Luftwaffe base at Memmingen, Germany. The bombers were late. Davis made a crucial decision: orbit in enemy territory rather than return to base. When the bombers finally appeared, so did the Luftwaffe, approximately 100 German fighters attacking from multiple directions. The Germans had learned that overwhelming numbers might break the red tail's protective screen. Despite fierce defence by the 332nd, who claimed 11 to 12 victories, 15 B-17 fell to enemy fighters in 20 minutes of savage combat. The 332nd lost 3 pilots: Lieutenants Robert Hutton, Wellington Irving, and Alfred Brown. Critics claimed the high bomber losses proved black pilots couldn't handle major battles. But operational analysis revealed the truth. The 332nd had arrived at an impossible situation with massive German forces already engaging the bombers. They had prevented complete disaster. By March 1945, the Luftwaffe's conventional fighters could barely challenge Allied air supremacy. But Germany had one last card: the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. With a top speed of 540 miles per hour, it could outrun any propeller-driven aircraft. On March 24, 1945, the 332nd Fighter Group received its most challenging assignment: escort bombers 1,600 miles round trip to Berlin to attack the Daimler-Benz tank factory. Intelligence warned that Me-262s from Jagdgeschwader 7 would defend the target. Colonel Davis led 43 P-51 Mustangs into the heart of the Reich. As they approached Berlin, Mi-262s appeared, the largest jet fighter force ever assembled for a single interception. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown had studied the jets' weaknesses. We knew the German jets were faster than we were. Instead of going directly after them, we went away from them and then turned into their blind spots, he explained. Brown shot down one Mi-262, reporting, "I pulled up at him in a 15-degree climb and fired 3 long bursts from 2,000 feet at 8 o'clock to him. Almost immediately, the pilot bailed out from about 24,500 feet. Lieutenant Earl Lane performed what many considered impossible, shooting down an Mi-262 with a 2,000-yard deflection shot using the new K-14 computing gun sight. Lieutenant Charles Brantley claimed the third jet victory that day. The destruction of 3 Mi-262s in a single engagement represented more jets than most fighter groups would destroy in the entire war. The Red Tails had just exceeded the total of all previous American Mi-262 kills in one afternoon. The 332nd Fighter Group earned a distinguished unit citation for this mission. Not all encounters between Tuskegee Airmen and Germans ended in victory. 32 pilots became prisoners of war, and their experiences revealed complex interactions between Nazi ideology and military reality. Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson was shot down on August 12, 1944, during his 19th mission. His P-51 took flak over southern France while strafing radar installations. At his interrogation, the German officer had extensive intelligence about the 332nd Fighter Group. The interrogator had information about Ramitelli Airfield, about our squadron commanders, even details about my parents' home in Detroit, Jefferson recalled. He knew my father was a teacher and my mother's maiden name. Their intelligence was frighteningly thorough. Inside Stalag Luft III, Jefferson found himself treated like any other American officer. White POWs from bomber crews often approached him with gratitude for red tail protection. These interactions, impossible in segregated America, occurred naturally in German prison camps. The irony wasn't lost on Jefferson. Here I was in a Nazi POW camp, being treated more equally by white Americans than I would be back home. When the war ended and Jefferson returned to the United States, he was immediately segregated at the disembarkation point. While German pilots reportedly acknowledged the Red Tail's skill with the nickname Schwarze Vogelmännchen, American bomber crews became their most vocal champions. These men, who faced death on every mission, cared nothing about race, only survival. Bomber crews developed their own mythology about the Red Tails. Stories spread about their distinctive flying style, the way they waggled their wings in greeting, their tight formations, their refusal to abandon damaged bombers. Red Tail Angels became the bomber crew's name for them. The statistics supported the bomber crew's preferences. Research by Air Force historian Dr. Daniel Hallman revealed that bombers under 332nd Fighter Group escort lost only 27 aircraft to enemy fighters, compared to an average of 46 for other P-51 groups of the 15th Air Force. This superior protection rate occurred despite the Red Tails flying some of the longest and most dangerous missions of the war. By war's end, the Tuskegee Airmen had compiled a combat record that demolished every pre-war assumption about black military capability. Combat operations: 1,578 combat missions flown, 15,000 plus individual sorties completed, 179 bomber escort missions, 311 missions for the 15th Air Force, enemy aircraft destroyed, 112 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 150 enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground, 3 Mi-262 jet fighters shot down on March 24, 1945. Ground targets destroyed: 950 railcars, trucks and motor vehicles, 254 locomotive engines. TA-22, former Italian destroyer Giuseppe Missori, damaged beyond repair on June 25, 1944. Protection record: 27 bombers lost to enemy fighters, versus 46 average for other groups. Superior protection rate maintained across 179 escort missions. Individual achievements. Lee Archer, 4 confirmed victories. Joseph Ellsbury, 4 victories, including 3 FW-19s on July 12, 1944. Edward Toppins, 4 victories. Clarence Lester, 3 kills in 1 mission, July 18, 1944. Decorations earned, 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 332nd Fighter Group pilots, 744 Air Medals, 14 Bronze Stars, 8 Purple Hearts, 3 Distinguished Unit Citations for the 99th Fighter Squadron, 1 Distinguished Unit Citation for the 332nd Fighter Group. Human cost 66 pilots killed in action, 32 pilots captured as prisoners of war, 84 killed in training and non-combat missions. The transformation from mockery to respect wasn't just about courage. It reflected superior American training methods and technological advantages the Red Tails wielded with precision. At Tuskegee, pilots flew more hours than their white counterparts, 300 compared to 200 for white pilots. They practiced formation flying obsessively, knowing that in combat, discipline would be their edge. The washout rate at Tuskegee was 60% compared to 40% for white cadets. Only the very best survived the program, creating what Colonel Noel Parrish, Tuskegee's commander, called a super-selected group. The progression through aircraft types told its own story. The 99th began with hand-me-down P-40 Warhawks, already obsolete when they arrived in North Africa. These liquid-cooled Allison engine fighters were inferior to German Bf-19s and FW-19s in almost every performance metric. Yet the Tuskegee pilots used the P-40's superior turning ability and rugged construction to hold their own. The arrival of P-51 Mustangs in July 1944 transformed the Red Tails into equals of any fighter unit in the war. The North American P-51D Mustang represented American industrial perfection. Its Packard-built Merlin engine gave it a top speed of 437 miles per hour. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns could destroy any aircraft. Most importantly, its range, over 1,600 miles with drop tanks, allowed it to escort bombers anywhere in the Reich. Behind every pilot who shot down a German aircraft stood dozens of support personnel, mechanics, armourers, crew chiefs, who kept the Red Tails flying. Of the approximately 16,000 Tuskegee airmen who served, fewer than 1,000 were pilots. The rest were the unsung heroes who made victory possible. The ground crews worked miracles with limited resources. Ramitelli Airfield in Italy was primitive compared to other American bases. Spare parts were scarce, with the 332nd often last in line for supplies. Yet their aircraft availability rate, the percentage of planes ready for combat, equaled or exceeded that of white units. These ground crews also faced combat. German raids on Ramitelli were rare but deadly. On March 24, 1944, a German bombing raid killed several support personnel. The men continued working through the attack, pulling aircraft away from burning fuel dumps. The strategic bombing campaign over Europe provided the ultimate testing ground for the Tuskegee Airmen. Each B-17 Flying Fortress cost $238,000 and carried 10 highly trained crew members. The loss of a single bomber represented a strategic setback that rippled through the entire war effort. This is why bomber protection mattered more than aerial victories. Colonel Davis understood this when he ordered his pilots to resist the temptation to chase German fighters. "Anyone can shoot down a fighter if they abandon their post," he said. "It takes discipline to stay with the bombers when the enemy is running." The Red Tails' escort tactics evolved through experience. They developed a 3-layer defense: close escort weaving directly above the bombers, medium escort positioned to intercept incoming fighters, and high escort watching for diving attacks. This system required precise coordination and absolute discipline. The Tuskegee Airmen fought 2 wars simultaneously. against fascism abroad and racism at home. Their combat record challenged both Nazi racial ideology and American segregation, proving that excellence in aerial combat transcended racial categorization. While the Tuskegee Airmen fought Germans abroad, they battled prejudice at home. Their victories over the Luftwaffe made headlines in black newspapers, but were often minimized or ignored by the mainstream press. The Pittsburgh Courier's Double V campaign, Victory Against Fascism Abroad and Racism at Home, used the Tuskegee Airmen as prime examples. The contrast with German awareness was stark. By 1945, the Luftwaffe reportedly knew exactly who flew the red-tailed Mustangs, calling them schwarze Vogelmenschen. Meanwhile, many white Americans didn't know black pilots existed. This ignorance was deliberate. The War Department rarely publicized the Tuskegee Airmen's successes. Victory in Europe brought not celebration, but uncertainty for the Tuskegee Airmen. While white units prepared for victory parades, the 332nd faced questions about their future. The Army Air Forces planned to maintain segregation despite combat evidence of its absurdity. For decades after World War II, the achievements of the Tuskegee Airmen remained largely unknown to mainstream America. Individual pilots struggled with this erasure. Lee Archer, with his 4 victories, worked as an executive but rarely spoke about his war record. "Nobody believed me anyway," he said. "A black fighter pilot? Must be lying." In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, integrating the U.S. military, a decision influenced by the Tuskegee Airmen's combat performance. Benjamin Davis, who had led the Red Tails over Berlin, became the Air Force's first black general in 1954. Recognition came slowly. In 2007, President George W. Bush awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to the Tuskegee Airmen. Only 300 of the original pilots survived to attend. Many had waited over 60 years for national recognition. The transformation from mockery to respect wasn't mythology, but documented fact. The numbers remain irrefutable. 112 aerial victories against the Luftwaffe. 3 Me-262 jet fighters destroyed in one mission. 150 enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground. 27 bombers lost versus 46 average for other groups. 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses earned by 332nd Fighter Group pilots. The reportedly nicknamed Schwarze Vogelmenschen proved that prejudice crumbles when confronted with undeniable capability. Every German fighter destroyed, every bomber protected, every mission completed added evidence to an irrefutable case. The colour of a pilot's skin had nothing to do with his ability to fly and fight. Roscoe Brown, who shot down a German jet over Berlin, summarized their achievement. "We didn't just fight the Germans. We fought ignorance, prejudice and hatred, and we won all 3 battles." The Tuskegee Airmen hadn't just won battles, they had changed history. They fought 3 wars simultaneously and won them all, defeating the Luftwaffe in combat, challenging Nazi racial ideology through performance, and eventually helping demolish American segregation through undeniable excellence. When given the opportunity, the Tuskegee Airmen soared, transforming mockery into respect, prejudice into acceptance, and enemies into witnesses of their extraordinary achievement.